The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to your one-stop shop for fringe ideas and conspiratorial topics. I'm the one they call Shane, as always, and today for you guys, I have yet another installment in the fascinating series that I've had Ari Asulin coming on and doing. He's covered the real history / hidden history of the world, part 1 through 3 up to this point, and this will be the 4th installment in that actually starts connecting into stuff that's going on in modern-day society, especially with all the stuff that's happening overseas right now, but we, of course, have a long way to get to that, especially considering the type of research that Ari comes on and does, connecting all the dots and always having information to back up every claim that he makes. But before we get into this fascinating part 4 of this one today, which I also recommend going back and listening to the first 3 parts if you haven't, but if you haven't, of course, Ari will fill you in a little bit to at least get you up to the starting point for today's episode. But before we get into this one today, of course, we've got to hit some news and updates and do the front of house stuff. First and foremost, I am trying to put together an investigation team for the Metro Detroit / Michigan area. I want to make it so that I can go out on monthly investigations, diving into cryptids, ufology, the paranormal, anything that happens to come our way as far as an investigation goes. So, of course, with that, I'm trying to look for diversity with this team as far as having a bunch of different types of researchers and investigators. So, if you feel like you might be interested in that team and you might be somewhat within driving distance of the Detroit area to possibly make it out to some monthly investigations, then you guys can go and fill out the application, which is down as a Google form in the show description. Should be all the way up at the top, and I should hopefully be announcing those as soon as I get a little bit of a stockpile going for those, but definitely something I want to get into the works, so make sure you guys check that out if you guys are interested, of course. And the next piece of news and updates that I wanted to share is that I want to try to add a lot more diversity as far as topics go on this show. In the beginning, I was diving into a lot of different stuff, kind of accompanying the name Inquiries of Our Reality as a whole, but it seems like as time's gone on, I've kind of fell into the corner of primarily just covering creatures and cryptids and UFOs and all that kind of stuff more so than anything. But with that, I want to expand, again, the topics that are talked about in the show more. So if you're somebody that possibly has a bizarre experience or encounter you'd like to share, somebody that possibly does research on fringe topics and or conspiracies, you possibly are a spiritual teacher or dive into some type of philosophy, you enjoy digging into folklore and or family stories, or you research ancient civilizations or hidden history, or possibly even have some background and understanding of the occult and secret societies. If any of those, or you have any other open-minded topics that you guys would like to come on the show and discuss, please get a hold of me, because I would love to, again, be able to expand the topic base on this show and make it so that we can get some more variety as far as Inquiries of Our Reality goes. But before we get into the show, just a quick message. This podcast has a strong focus on community engagement, so I encourage all listeners to share their own experiences and research on the show. That said, if anyone would like to be a guest on the show, or if anybody has an encounter or experience that they would like to share on the show, or possibly even have me investigate, you guys can get a hold of me through email, which is inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys give the hotline a call or text, and that number is 313-364-1551. Or, of course, you guys can get a hold of me through social media. Wherever you guys happen to find me on the internet, just don't forget to get a hold of me. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome back to the show for the fourth continuation of the series that we've been covering, Ari Asulin from ParadigmThreat.net.
Thank you for having me on again.
For anybody that hasn't caught the last couple episodes, just a quick reference if anybody wants to go back and listen to those, because this is going to be part 4 of a continuing series, and who knows, maybe we'll get into a part 5, part 6, who knows. As long as Ari wants to keep coming on the show and sharing stuff, I'm always down to have him on. So if you guys want to go back and start from the beginning, episode 238, episode 244, and episode 266. So just a quick heads up. And for anybody that may not have listened to those episodes or that may not want to go back and listen to those episodes for whatever reason, and after they listen to this one, I'm sure they will definitely want to go back and listen to those ones. But for any of those people out there, why don't you quickly let them know about your website and everything before we start getting into today's content?
You bet. My website is ParadigmThreat.net. It's a conspiracy repository. Feel free to check it out and give me a ping on the chat.
And let's see, how long have you been running this website for now? Because it seems like every single time that you come on, you always have like this ridiculous amount of heavy information. And I can't even imagine, man, how long it takes you to compile all this type of stuff, because you have connecting dots to like everything and you have evidence to back up every suggestion that you make. So, I mean, how long have you been running this website? Just before we start everything off.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's been about 6 or 7 years now. It's hard to remember. It really was a collection repository of all these things on the internet that we see all the time. I want to start collecting it. So I just add to it over time, and that's the reason why it's so full right now. Just everything I see, I just toss into the repo. So it never gets lost, essentially.
The good news is every time you come on, I guarantee you have a new compile or a new giant pile of information. So I'm just going to keep having you on as long as you want to keep coming on and sharing the information, man.
You bet, man.
And I guess kind of getting into today's topic, I don't know if you kind of want a quick refresh, maybe the tail end of what we were talking about last time to kind of continue on in, or wherever you happen to want to start, man. The floor is yours, and screen share is also available for you if you want to screen share throughout the presentation that you're doing.
I appreciate it. So last time we talked about the mud flood theory, which is the idea that maybe in the 19th century, there was a great reset of all civilization on Earth, cities, culture, languages, religion, everything. And that reset, also known as Renaissance and all kinds of other names, may have actually occurred as a physical event, not necessarily just literary and scholarly events, but there may have actually been a physical mud flood in the 19th century, early 19th century, that essentially buried the Earth, parts of the Earth, with mud that's been torn up out of the ground from giant lightning discharge, interplanetary lightning discharge, essentially. And I won't get into all details again, but this theory has gained a lot of traction in the last couple of years, especially because it's related to the Tatarian theory that there was this Russian Tatarian Empire out there that's been also utterly erased from history and possibly physically erased from the surface of the Earth, leaving Siberia behind. And essentially, that's just a theory. Where I get most of my my long-term facts about chronology, about human chronology, is Fomenko's new chronology. And Fomenko, the Russian mathematician from the 90s, who came up with a new chronology, did so entirely based on math and facts. So I just want to mention that because on one hand, I got these hypothetical theories, which, although there might be a lot of evidence, the evidence is speculative and there's not going to be any way to really prove any of it. And on the other hand, Fomenko, I think, did exactly that. He proved that history had been messed with and that there was this other way to determine what the real history is. So last couple podcasts are covered the new chronology. And I'm going to start out this one with an issue I'm having with Fomenko's research. He has some crazy claims in there. I mean, these are crazy. They're, to me, I agree with them, but I have to pose them as crazy, and you'll see exactly why. He says that certain events, say Noah's flood from the Bible, or Hanukkah from the Persian, Euclidean, I think that name, empire that occupied the Israelites in the Bible. These events, he says, are not only not ancient, but they're recent. And that's kind of crazy. Like Noah's Ark is based on a recent event. That's quite a claim, but these are part of the many, many claims that him and his team came up with in the 90s and based their new chronology on. So it's not really a problem I'm having, but I've been trying to understand his new chronology for a long time. I never really bought all his books and read them all. I've been piecing it together through his timelines, and 'cause I don't have time to read all his books. I don't think anyone really does these days. You know, got jobs and stuff. These days, we gotta really jump on people's shoulders. It's the only way to get to anywhere. And I've decided that his fact points seem to really check out every single time I look one up. If he says something weird about how Noah's Ark could be based on a symbolic ark agreements between three religious orders sometime in the 17th century, then and I'm not going to get into details about that so much. Then, well, it's really hard to fathom that that's sort of where they got the story from. But he makes this case really clearly that the modern history we received in schools and churches has been drastically simplified. I mean, we all can admit that, right? The version of Columbus, the story that we heard, or King David, or Jesus. These stories have been simplified so much that I would call them the Disneyland version. You know how Disney movies are. They're so one-dimensional. They're pretty much all terrible.
Makes it seem like an entire person's life was just made up of like 2 or 3 events.
Exactly. I like Aladdin. I like Tron. Otherwise, I hate the Disney format. How they reduce, all these ancient myths into something accessible for children. That's not what they are. Histories, myths, all these things are inaccessible. They're encrypted, very confusing and contradictory. If anything, they inspire the imagination, for artists and stuff. They're not something that you should, in my opinion, simplify. But that's exactly what we did in church with the Bible. It's what we did in synagogue with the Torah. We sort of said, and then the Jews went here and got in trouble, and this happened. It's like, okay, I read the Torah in parts of it in Hebrew school, where I did go for night class. And I might as well say I'm born and raised Jewish. My entire family lives in Israel. They're dealing with all that stuff that's happening over there. So I have a lot of perspective on this religion. And then my wife's family was very Christian. So I got a lot of perspective on that. And I knew a lot of Muslims as well. That's my daughter in the background there. I do agree with him on that. The history we received, even stuff like the Mayflower and the way the colonies formed in America are simplified for level of children. And then they're taught to children in school at a very early age where they then do not challenge it ever again. So for that reason, Fomenko argues, not only are these stories tying back to something really confusing and abstract, but we should expect that to happen. Every single time a major event happens where a civilization is conquered and their literature is redacted into some new form, we have to expect that the history has been heavily simplified down. And so when it comes to, let me think of Hanukkah's story, for example. The Hanukkah story, to me, it's confusing why we even have the holiday. It's so full of holes, not from contradictions or anything. It's just, why do we care about this moment in the history when...
just for a little bit of background too, because I'm not too familiar with like Jewish background. What's the meaning of Hanukkah? What's like the overall that everybody kind of says is the meaning of Hanukkah? Like, what's the origin of it? Just, for the mainstream, of course.
Okay. Can't share screen, but I'll just mention it. So,
does it say it won't give you access? Because you should hopefully have access.
No, I think you did it right. And I got install stuff. I got install X11 display server. It's Ubuntu. I didn't do this last time, but it's okay. I don't really have anything to share anyway. I'm mostly going to pull up Google searches describing these things quickly. So Hanukkah is the rededication of the Second Temple of Jerusalem in 2nd century BC. That is the secular explanation. The traditional explanation, same time and everything, was that God was involved and so forth. But secular historians still agree that there was a Second Temple period, that the Euclidean Empire had occupied the Israelites at this time. And at one point they had a fight and they took back the temple of Jerusalem. And then the Hanukkah holiday follows that because the priests who retook the temple did not have enough oil to light the candles for 8 days, which, there's a lot of questions as to why that matters and where the 8-day symbolism comes from and all kinds of stuff. is not the point. The point is that God shows up to make the oil last 8 days when they only had one. It's not really the kind of miracle that people would say wow to, compared to say some of the things Jesus did. And yet we have this almost central theme religion. It's like one of the central themes of being a Jew in America is Hanukkah, because you're constantly competing with Christmas almost at the same time of the year. It's a lunar solar calendar, so they don't always line up. But this year, Hanukkah's first day falls on Christmas Eve, 25th, and goes on for 8 days.
Do you think that's where the popularization of the holiday, because you said it wasn't like, just from the explanation, doesn't it sound like any crazy spectacular event? Of course, if you have like religious connection to it, I'm sure that there is, but is that where it became so competitive feeling with like Christmas and stuff like that? Is just because they fall around the same time, so it was more like it got popularized just because of where it falls in turn with like the Christian holiday?
Yeah, that's the only real competition there. I was constantly seeing these two holidays compared my whole childhood. And I always felt like all the kids in school were all Christian. I only knew one or two Jews in my school. And and my parents were, lenient about it. They said, obviously everyone celebrates Christmas here. There's nothing wrong with it. But we don't. And that's it. We celebrate Hanukkah. We mostly a lot of blue decorations. Still got the lights up. You light the candles for eight straight nights, and you get presents every night. It's almost the exact same thing. It's called the Festival of Lights. Surprise, surprise, so is Christmas. Surprise, surprise, so is Diwali. Every religion has a festival of lights, and that's the official name of it, but they think it's part of a separate religion. So Fomenko makes it very clear. None of these religions were ever separate in the past. They became separate in the process of redacting history. At some point, people insist those are Christians, those are Jews, those are Muslims. When even today, if we were to take a look at them, we'd say, hey, they have turbans on. They're not Christians. Or, hey, they look like Christian priests. They can't possibly be Muslims or Russians or Tatarian or any of the other names.
Hold on tight, everyone. Inquiries of Our Reality will be right back after this brief commercial break. But if you don't mind taking a second to follow Inquiries of Our Reality on Instagram and Facebook, and Open Minds Media on YouTube and TikTok, I'd greatly appreciate it. And feel free to spark up a conversation. I love getting to know you guys. And now back to the show.
So Fomenko is saying, here's what happens. And what he says, that's the part I'm challenged about. He says so much about this Avignon Empire, this ancient agreement in Spain in the 13th century to unify all the religious orders of the world under a Rex Bellator. Rex means it's Latin for a warrior king, who is based directly on the descendant of Christ, even though at many points the lineage has been broken and they just continue with the plan anyway. They say, oh, that guy is now the descendant or the real bloodline. And eventually the entire story moves from Russia to Palestine, but before Palestine, Spain. And during the Crusades of the Americas, for example, Spain made a lot of portraits of Jesus, looking like a Spanish conquistador, essentially. And they brought those portraits to America. And for this reason, Europe and America really think that Jesus looks like this Spanish guy. So that's how much redaction has occurred before we got a copy of all of it. And that's what Fomenko is saying. Every time the redaction occurred, it's a result of some major war or crusade, bunch of people being killed, and then the story gets simplified again, and the details are completely lost.
That is pretty true that you usually see anytime there's any type of war, like what was happening with ISIS, as whatever, all the conspiracies around that, like there are every single time there's something that happens like that, they try to destroy all the religious artifacts, it seems, first and foremost. And they may not always talk about it on the news, but it's always happening behind the scenes because they're rewriting history as they're going on these campaigns.
Exactly. So to sum up real fast, the Rex Bellator plan that started in Spain, but it was actually a worldwide plan, because the Russian Empire back then was worldwide. And they had many different religious orders in different regions based on different religions, essentially, that have been incorporated into Christianity. And the Russian Tatarian Empire started Christianity. The first Tsar was Christ. His name wasn't Jesus yet. That name didn't appear until 200 years later. Neither did J or Z in the Cyrillic alphabet. And this empire needed a unity plan for its military. After they conquered the world, took them about a century to do that. They needed to keep everyone in line so there wouldn't be rebellions. So this plan, Rex Bellator plan, was the real reason why all of the wars from then on, from 13th century all up until today, have occurred. They've all been based on this one problem, that the religions of the world have been split into 3 or 4 different denominations who all worship the exact same God and almost more or less have the exact same religious exalted figures like Jesus or King David, and yet they're fighting with each other. So
People forget that Jesus would have been a Jew. He was and also he would have called God Allah. So it kind of intermixes all of them just within that statement.
exactly. The original story, which the Christian Empire started out quite polytheistic and secular. They more or less hated monotheism when they started out, and the monotheists were their enemies. So I got into that in those other podcasts. It all ended with the monotheists setting up in Western Europe, creating Protestantism, resisting the empire, and eventually invading it, installing their own people within the royal order. They got a foreigner in as the czar position in the Tatarian Empire. And at that point, the whole empire was starting to really get shaky and was going to start falling apart. The Russians themselves had said for years, and they still do today, that their emperors had all been foreigners since long before Catherine the Great sold out their culture entirely to Europe, making them nothing more than a vassal, starting around the 17th century. And the last major cataclysm was between Russia and Turkey. These days it's called Turkey, so we might as well get the name right. Turkey stands out as extremely important in history. Not only was it the first location of Jerusalem, the location where the Tatarian Empire waged the Crusades in revenge for the crucifixion, taking out the temple, and then setting up a new religious order in place of monotheism that lasted for a long time until in around the 17th century, the last vestiges of that ancient Christian, the Christ bloodline, were replaced entirely by Western Europeans. 17th century, leading into the 18th century, the Russian Empire is constantly at war with itself. This is where we get the history from the Muslims, Christians, and Jews actually starting to fight each other. They didn't fight each other 3,000 years ago. They fought each other 300 years ago. And it was during that final splintering when they identified each other separately from each other, lost the plurality of their religions, separated their icons even. You got like the crescent and cross. That used to be a symbol of Russia for the longest time, a symbol of the alliance of the religious orders of the world. And when those orders finally split up, they split their icons. And you're the crescent, you're the cross, and the brand new Star of David was pulled out of nowhere. It was not a religious symbol that existed before the 19th century. It's the symbol of Saturn. You could go look at right now on Saturn, North Pole, to see the Star of David, or a cube, depending on if you see flat or 3D. But it's pretty amazing that there's a hexagon on the top of Saturn. But they saw it in ancient times, and they said, our God, creator God, Saturn, Satan, El Yahweh, Jehovah, many names, is wearing a 6-pointed hat, and we're going to do that too. We're going to wear a kippah, and we're going to, all these traditions came out late in the 19th century, spilling into the public. And one big question is, why did all this happen suddenly in the 19th century to Judaism and to Islam as well? Fomenko points out that if you look at all of the Islamic holy texts, the Quran, and all of the books that compile it, you'll find out that almost all the major decisions were made in the 19th century, which is the same century where they finally mass printed the Quran and the Torah and the Bible. So it was just in that 19th century where the powers that be, the heads of those military religious orders, essentially, located in Europe, in mansions and stuff. These guys ran the world after the Russian Empire disappeared. They took over the vacuum starting in 1773 with the rebellion of Pugachev that lasted 2 years, that tore Russia apart culturally, but also apparently there was some kind of major war and fallout. The weapons were starting to become kind of advanced back then. Stuff we don't really know about. Sound cannons. It's mentioned in the Bible a lot. Electric.
Would that kind of play into the whole like trumpets with like the walls of Jericho and everything, I assume?
Exactly. Jericho is yet another recent event, only 300 or 400 years ago. I'm not right. I'm not exactly right, but Fomenko could point out exactly when and what those events were, redacted into a different narrative. But
that's kind of a weird thing to think about, though. They played the trumpets around the walls. Then after so many days, the walls fell. It almost, again, sounds like an energy weapon that you'd have to project energy on it for a certain amount of time. And then after that, it makes the walls fragile and then they're able to crumble in. Like, that's a totally different, weird perspective to think about, but it completely makes sense.
Bingo. That story was one of the few stories where the Israelites actually had a weapon. Even though it was just a trumpet, they used the trumpets as weapons, but almost always they were just fighting with their hands and normal weapons. And this one, they seem to have an army. There's other references in the Bible of armies that could shoot out across the field with something that struck the enemy and destroyed it. These sounds like advanced weapons.
Even if it's some type of like energy or vibrational weapons, I mean, it may not be like technology like how people are imagining it now, but just hitting the right pitch or frequency, again, could be projected into the right area and, again, make rocks fragile where they eventually crumble.
Exactly. You got it. There's a lot of cannons around the world, monuments of cannons. And if you look at some of those Central or Eastern European monuments, the cannons look weird. They're huge. They're made of metal sometimes, and or I mean, not just metal, but like a ringing metal, like instrument metal. And some of them actually have notes written on the top, and those notes are the notes that those cannons play. A lot of people say, well, those were regular gunpowder cannons back in the 18th century or 19th even. But if you think about it, or if you're good with munitions even, you would know that the way they're designed, they're way too fragile for gunpowder for a cannon. They would simply crack in half when they're used. A lot of people speculate that these are sound cannons that are left behind right now in monuments that, if we were to take them down and look at them, we might be able to determine that they're still usable. If we could get them to work today, then they were definitely used like that in the past.
Do you think that the musical notes might be on there as a matter of, assumably you might have to like tune these type of things like an instrument, so maybe that is there so that you know exactly what pitch it's supposed to be set to or tuned to in order for the weapon to work? Or do you think it was just a matter of them decorating it?
I do believe the weapon, its size is the tuning, and its usage determines the type of frequency that it will be outputted or chord, and the notes describe the functionality. This is what this instrument does. And the only reason for that is because, like you said earlier, certain frequencies do certain things. Some heal you, some tear you apart from within, some make you go blind, some make you go crazy. I can imagine that the cans were used as warnings first, and then as destruction later. They had all kinds of different features to them. This comes after 500 years of a huge worldwide empire building weapons and constantly setting up crusades. It's all they knew. It's all they did. So before the reset of the 19th century, we seem to have gotten all of our weapons down. The real weapons, not the nonsense we built today. These artillery weapons that we have today are so dangerous to use. They're hard to maintain on your own. They can cause a lot of damage to a region that's hard to repair later. You can understand where these sound cannons actually were understood to be almost merciful, means of destruction.
That's kind of a weird thing to think about too, because when you think of like any ancient warfare, everybody has their different variation of like these trumpets, and history says that they used it to make it sound like they were a bigger crowd coming over a hill. But if you think about the fact of if you have like 100 people that all have this same trumpet playing the exact same note at the same time, it takes on a totally different idea. And even if they try to like re-show this, or mainstream history, not necessarily even trying to cover it up, but just they find it and they're only using one single one, it's not going to have the same effect as if you have, again, 100 men all playing the same note at the same time, because it's not intense enough with just that single one.
Absolutely. I also mentioned that these are instruments that have a power source. It's not like someone's blowing on them or anything. They definitely had some kind of power source in the past. You had to harness all kinds of energy. They built cities like like circuit boards, very efficient spacing of energy. And they knew all that stuff to a T. We have lost all that knowledge, and we're acting like we're reinventing it today. But
Or we're hiding it within occult knowledge and putting
Yeah,
it inside
that's another way to put
circuitry, and everybody knows who's programming and creating this stuff, maybe where it came from, but it's occultly hidden within it, because years down the line, maybe somebody else will discover it and rediscover that code that they're hiding within circuit boards, because the average person isn't tearing apart microscopic circuit boards and actually seeing how intricate these little fine details are.
Yep. So the challenge for me was to understand what Fomenko was saying about the religions, why they were split so long ago, and why this ended up giving power to a military order that was basically unstoppable. When I mean unstoppable, I mean immune to rebellion. It's hard to imagine an army that doesn't rebel, because the French Revolution, the army was really rebellious, and many other ones were too, like Civil War. It's really hard to control your troops. It's just, you gotta do training and discipline, punishment. You gotta make examples of people. But when it came to religious military orders, this was sort of a perfected scheme from hundreds of years ago, long ago, when the civilizations conquered by the Tsarian Empire had to be conscribed into militaries that could be used for more conquest. So my point is, these are we don't understand them today because we don't think that the war that happens today is of religious nature. If you look up on Google right now, what percent of the wars are religious wars? They'll say like 10% or something like that. It's just not the case. If you look at every war in every region, you can always find the religious aspect to it. World War II, there was a major religious aspect. The North mythology threatening the Catholics, threatening the Jews. In World War I, it was the end of the Ottoman Empire that had basically terrorized Europe for hundreds of years. They took a lot of white slaves for a long time. These Muslim religious order, this religious order of Muslims in the Middle East, far into Russia, far into Asia, and in many places in Europe, seemed unstoppable until World War I, when they were finally defeated. So all of these wars were religious, and the current situation that we're in right now, with the Middle East situation, seems to be entirely based on the history of how these religions were used for warfare, because nobody cares about any of this religious schism except for how it might be used as a means for warfare or terrorism. Before the 80s, I don't think anyone thought that the Muslims would go to war with anyone. They seemed to be defeated and kind of behind in education, technology, and everything. So what I realized recently with all the recent events that's happened is that in 1979, the Ayatollah Revolution really set the stage for everything that we've seen since. I was born in 1982, and it seemed to me that the world was fanatically religious when I was growing up. I got a lot of, got to go to church. God's watching you at all times, and he's going to hit you if you misbehave and stuff. And that's the synagogue side. And I had friends on the church side that had the exact same experience. And as we were discussing earlier, in the 90s, the religion fervor seems to go away a little bit. People start to walk away from the church and really start to question all of this, all of the hokey claims by religion. And I remember a lot of people losing faith. So
I remember a lot of people saying, like, I worship, whatever in my own way, and they wouldn't go to church, but they'd still be like religious in their own mind. It was like that separation where people still had the background, the feelings for it, but they just stopped being as much part of the like organized religion concept.
Exactly. And one of the big questions in my life, because I do believe that our lives have been put on hold by all this, what was that religious revival of the 80s? It was so weird. You had you had people before the 80s feeling very differently about religion. It was pluralistic. There was no fighting spirit. There was no one in the world except for maybe the Israelis who were acting like there was some existential threat out there. We all felt that, we mean the world, felt that after World War II, after Hitler was defeated, that no one would try to do anything like that again, separate religions out, be fascist, that kind of thing. So when the 80s came, everyone started getting really religious again. And I believe it's because The 1979 Ayatollah Revolution scared the crap out of the Judeo-Christians, the Zionists. It really scared them because for the first time in our modern history, the Shiite Muslims of Iran were becoming radicalized. The Shiites were always historically the lesser radical, the more rich, more educated, better technology version of the Muslims than the Sunnis. The Sunnis were messed with by the British, who left behind a big mess in the World War II. They partitioned Palestine terribly, left behind sort of a crisis that was going to keep growing until today. They partitioned India into Pakistan, which they shouldn't have done, separating the Muslim population, which is again a schism that's lasts till today. They even had a hand in creating China, and they had this kind of plan with China to take over the world with their population, which the Chinese had themselves put down in the Maoist revolution of the 70s.
Hold on, guys. We have to take a break to pay some bills. But if you don't like hearing the ads, then I have a solution for you. You can get ad-free and early access to this show and Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin on the Open Minds Media Patreon for just $1 a month. It's a great way to support the show and all the hard work behind it. And if you're interested in merch store discounts or video versions of the show, then there are a few other tiers with additional benefits, with 7-day free trials available. And we are back, so let's hop right in.
The British and the American CIA apparently had spent a great deal of time setting the stage for the religious schism that we're seeing today. They set everything up to set us up for a holy war that was one day going to sweep everything away into World War III. Something that none of us saw coming, because we all thought that people were going away from religion since the 90s. We keep hearing about radical Islam and stuff, and we know that Jews and Christians were also in some ways radicalized. If you look at the settlements and just people willing to go volunteer, and just slaughter people and stuff in Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it. It didn't seem to matter if you're Christian, Jew, Muslim, Indian, or anything. We all had a radical element that the British had set up that they're just waiting to trigger. So when it comes to the Ayatollah, that one was the first time when the neocons were actually worried. Every other time they felt like they could contain religious radicals. But the Ayatollah was special because in the 50s, we set them up with nuclear reactors. We built about a dozen of them, and we gave them nuclear technology, and we supported the Shah. And then we said that the people overthrew the Shah in a popular revolution. Of course, that's not what happened at all. The CIA was heavily involved. They spent $1 million alone on propaganda. You can look that figure up to promote the Ayatollah after they took over, saying this is good because they're going to reverse all the Shah's policy. Now, that guy was insane. He's banned honey and stuff, honeybees. It wasn't any great victory for the Ayatollah to take over. In fact, it was a big disaster for their culture. Iran at the time, early 80s, late 70s, was almost identical to America. Walking down the streets, you see liberated people, men, women, young people wearing Western clothing. They love our movies, playing our music. But after the Ayatollah Revolution, it all went over to Sharia law. And now, if you look at Iran, you see a lot more hijabs and conformity. And they protest, but it doesn't matter. The Ayatollah is firmly in charge. And then what makes them special, of course, is that they had those nuclear stations, and that at some point within the next 30 years, they're able to, or next 45 years, they're able to refine uranium enough to make it into a so-called dirty bomb. A lot of people are confused about nuclear bombs. I know I said that before. I don't believe that a nuclear bomb with a big flash that vaporizes you is real. That's a movie thing. In Hiroshima, they showed vaporized shadows on the ground to scare people, to make them think that something like that had happened. But actually what happened was the first nuclear device was a so-called dirty bomb. A dirty bomb is noted as dirty because there's a version of uranium bombs that aren't dirty. If you just refine uranium and you put it in a bomb and you blow up a village, here, I'm going to let you on a big secret now. You might actually do something good for the village. Sure, there'll be a big fireball, but radiation is healthy. it's been known that radiation is healthy for a long time. In the 20s, everyone was expecting the atomic engines. In the 50s, they finally showed up.
Just a
But
quick side note too. There's some village in Italy that has, I believe it's Italy. I was watching some weird special on it the other day. It was some William Shatner thing, but they were talking about how there's this specific pool that everybody swims in, and they say, "Oh, it's the fountain of youth. It's the reason why we stay young for forever. You know, it's the reason why everybody's so old here, and supposedly it's radioactive." So just to continue in with what you were saying, like,
well, thank you for that, because I'm going to definitely look that up after. That's exactly it. There's this one guy, I can look up a name. Windsor is his last name. Galen Windsor. He's a guy from the 50s, U.S. military into engineering. He worked on the nuclear stations, and he was trying to get people in Washington to understand two things. One, nuclear fissile material is safe. You don't necessarily have to ban it from the public, and you don't have to evacuate everyone out when there's a release of it. Two, but there is a way where it can be dangerous. If you put too much fissile material together, you stick it together, it will create something called critical mass. We're told critical mass causes a massive fireball. This is just not true. It's not ever been true in any nuclear reactor meltdown in history. Not Chernobyl or anywhere else. The fireball comes from simply the release of all of that radioactive material into the dirt. The dirt, the ground, concrete, metal, it doesn't matter. When you're talking about uranium, depleted uranium, this is one of the heaviest elements that there is, made as heavy as it can be. It gets hot, and when it goes into the ground, it's known as a bunker buster for this reason. It will go through any type of material. So the heat and the fireball are simply a release of the friction caused by a material that's essentially an unstoppable force moving through an immovable object. And if you understand thermodynamic law, you know that you can absolutely ascertain a tremendous amount of heat from just forcing that heavy material into the ground. You get this tremendous fireball. We see pictures of it in Yemen in that war. We've actually been using dirty bombs against them. And took me a while to understand that with Hiroshima, people did get sick. They got leukemia. I learned it in school, but for a while there, I doubted it. There's a lot of stuff about Hiroshima that was just lied about. The leukemia seems to be real. And that's because the bomb really was dirty. The one that we dropped on them on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It's a depleted uranium. And when I mean depleted, I don't just mean refined. There's an extra process, another process. When you use up all the energy of a fissile material, you have an empty battery, essentially, of fissile material. And this material not only doesn't release any more energy to your reactor to heat up the water, but it starts to suck energy in. And not necessarily making things cold or anything. I just mean suck any kind of scalar energy, the type of energy that flows through the body, flows through electromagnetic fields, that kind of thing. That radiation is extremely dangerous. If you get near that radiation, you get sick and die. Proof is in the Iraq War. The first Iraq War, we went and bombed the airport in Iraq, the main airport. And then later on, we decided we needed that airport ourselves to land our planes. Turns out the soil was too radioactive, so we had to replace all the soil in the whole airport, square miles of soil, just so our workers could actually stand on the ground. So I definitely believe that the dirty bombs are real, but they're lying to us about what they are and how they get them. They get them by putting them in reactors for 30 years. That's exactly where we were at. 30, 40 years of using nuclear reactors across the world has created a problem. There's refined dirty bomb material all over the place that we don't know what to do with. This is now different from something else that we all do know about, toxic waste. So there's a difference between dirty bomb, no longer fissile radioactive material, and toxic waste, which comes from the water pools of nuclear power stations. Galen Windsor was known for jumping into those water pools as demonstration of his theory that is not making him sick. And he did live a long life, so there was no question there. He was just his information never got out. There's videos, you can look them up, his presentations and all that. No one cared. They instead said, nope, nuclear bombs can cause huge, widespread destruction. There was a lot of destruction in Nagasaki, but even the Japanese said, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that there was another element in addition to the bombs that was used. White phosphorus was sprayed all over those cities before the bombs were triggered so that they could get the kind of, flash look that they wanted. But as far as evaporating people, vaporizing and all that, just put it out of your mind. No such thing is possible, not with these bombs. So the only real risk was that the Ayatollah would someday release their refined uranium that they produced just by having those stations that we set up. This is not some kind of technology they came up with. They don't need nuclear scientists for it. It's weird that the nuclear scientists keep getting assassinated in that country. I think it's just to keep them dumb, so that they don't realize certain truths about it, like that this could be solved in a smart fashion, that the deal that the Obama administration put forth to exchange nuclear fissile material was a stupid deal, not only because it doesn't make real scientific sense with the truth and reality of these materials, but because the Obama deal had set up the Ayatollah to totally break the deal at some point in the future and cause directly a world war confrontation. No doubt about it. We're all talking about it all the time in all the TV shows. Remember that show Upload? It came out like 5 years ago. One of the characters lost his legs in Iran, right? In the future. Yeah, we talk so coyly about the war that America will someday have with Iran. So I finally understood. It's because there was a plan over 45 years now, since that Ayatollah revolution to prevent this war. Now, who are the players in this chessboard? We know about the Zionist neocons. We know who they are. We know that Bibi Netanyahu has been saying the exact same thing since the 90s. We know that he's been supported by a lot of neocons in the West that never really changed their tone, like the Bush, dynasty and so forth. And now Trump has shown up and gave Israel this huge platform to accomplish all their goals in, wipe out their enemies, and change the game in their favor forever. And we all, as the analysts of this, watching Trump this whole time saying, geez, I hope he's doing the right thing here, his fans only had faith in him because we don't have anything else. We don't have any proof that any of his policies were correct. He never got to do any of them in his first term, and it was dismantled after he left. So it was plausibly deniable that Trump had accomplished anything at all more than just giving the Israelis a green light to go and take Gaza someday. And I do believe that he's going to have to go down for this someday. He did do that after all, and there were a lot of innocent civilians injured. There's no real way to say that two wrongs make a right when it comes to civilian casualties, especially when they get from the tens of thousands, hundred thousands, So what I finally understood was the only reason they're acting this way is because they believe the threat was so real. It wasn't just a bunch of crazy Muslim Ayatollah, with their hands on nukes. That wasn't really the scope of the issue. The scope was who set them up. We know that the British set this up a long time ago and left. We know that MI6 was still involved heavily in the 90s before British took a financial dive in the 21st century and disappeared from the geopolitical scene, not to mention Brexit. And we know that the CIA was heavily involved in the Ayatollah's creation. So that's where I got it. I finally got it. This is not a war between religions. This is a war between the CIA and the Zionist neocon elements, who apparently weren't even in the same league about anything that's ever happened in the 20th century. Whereas the CIA was constantly promoting communist rebel overthrows of rational dictators and just creating tyranny and chaos. The neocons were waging wars of equal incredulity to contain such radicalism. And none of us, in between us rational, normal people, wanted to take either side because both seemed completely war hawkish, completely insane. So it wasn't really so insane because if you really factor in the fact that it was the CIA then you start to get a real handle of why they got so scared. If it was the CIA behind it, then geez, I mean, they could have planned anything anywhere. This could have been so subtle and elaborate that we're going to see some twists to the story down the road that nobody can predict, and they're going to beat us on this game.
Just to make some weird predictions on this one too.
Yeah.
So of course they're kind of labeling everything happening overseas as like a holy war, and there's a bunch of these like predictions and everything that it's going to be like the start of World War III, and World War III is going to be religious war, all of this kind of stuff. If you're looking at the world more as like a chess game, that all of these different leaders, all these different figures are actually working for an end ploy to something, or they're possibly even mixed in with the CIA. And I know that there's a lot of conspiracy around Trump, not trying to necessarily get into like the political sidings of everything, but again, if you're looking at everything more back, like everything's a chessboard and everybody knows their piece and they're playing it. They talk about regularly on the news, and I'm sure this is part of the propaganda of it, the whole radicalized Christian movement, as they like to kind of relate with Trump. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the case, but again, you're using propaganda to get all of the Christians in America to a point where they're pissed off, they're angry, they're ready to fight. And then once you get them to that point, then, you had this whole thing going on with the military where, a lot of people are against having like transgenders, like soldiers and all this kind of stuff. And they're radicalizing and they're making, I don't want to necessarily say radicalizing yet, but they're pissing off a lot of Christians in America to the point where they're going to say pretty much, step out of the way, we'll control the military, we'll do all this kind of stuff. So then they're bringing that Christian religious standpoint into this war going overseas through basically using propaganda to mix everybody's mind up. And I'm sure that there was never necessarily a point where the Christians were that solid pissed off until the news started turning it into a thing where they were regularly like going after the Christians on the news. And once you push somebody into a corner enough times, then of course they're going to eventually snap.
Right. The Christians were just as liable to join up on this holy war as any other religion. They didn't have any immunity to speak of. Neither did the Asians, for example. Look at what just happened with South Korea. Boy, that was scary. For 2 hours, the president declared martial law. That was last week, right?
Yeah, and then all the soldiers were like, "We're not doing nothing."
The soldiers were ordered to lock down Parliament and not let the parliamentaries in there. And then the parliamentaries apparently just showed up anyway and probably just screamed at the soldiers. Like, how dare you?
The soldiers like didn't do anything to the point where I was seeing videos of them where like the protesters or whatever they were outside were like smacking their guns out of their hands, and they're just like they didn't want to take a shot because they knew that as soon as they did anything, it was going to escalate.
Because they knew exactly what this meant. Their so-called democracy is a fake, and the president has the authority apparently to bring the entire country into martial law, prepare it for some kind of stupid conflict with North Korea that we've been also preparing for our whole lives. So this isn't just Muslims, Christians, Jews. This is everyone in the world. We all have the same sort of religious origin, and the British and the Jesuits and all these other people who messed with that so long ago figured all this stuff about us out to perfection, to a science, and they've been using it, employing it in modern times. The CIA knew what they were doing. They knew exactly what they're doing. Their plan was devastating. It was unstoppable. It involved the destruction of Israel, the wiping out of much of its population who wasn't able to escape in time, the retaking of the Holy Land by the Muslims, and then finally the shutting down of all Islam by seculars and Christians. All predicted a long time ago. It shows up in that H.G. Wells book, Shape of Things to Come. Like I said in the last podcast, it's very eerie how they told us the plan, got us flushed for it, and then at some point they execute it. So what went wrong? Well, those neocons weren't as idiot as we thought they were. We got a lot of impressions from people like Dick Cheney and people that really shouldn't be there, people that do start wars and are idiots. But there's also the kind of neocons that means neoconservatives, people who represent a new type of conservatism that is willing to go to war, which is really not in the conservative character.
That might be the ploy where you have to get the Christian army based back into it, because you were talking about earlier that it's like you can't get that patriotism back up, but if you have people that are fighting for God, then that's when it gets into a whole different ploy. So again, maybe it's an intentional game because they know that people aren't going to fight for America anymore, but they will fight for their religion. So they're trying to spark up, again, the Christian movement in America so they can push it and actually have an army that's not going to go rogue on them because it's Christian based and they're fighting for God and their religion instead of fighting for, their land back home.
Right. So I think the neocons realized all this could be used for good and evil, and we're seeing good and evil all the time. With the Iraq War, they were trying to contain Iran. That was more or less a good attempt to reduce radicalism. With the Afghanistan War, the CIA had pushed us into that one, and we couldn't stop it. Bush couldn't stop it. The newspapers were all telling the world that we are going to go find the Taliban because they allowed Al Qaeda in there temporarily. Everyone's just like, what is this stupid narrative? It didn't matter how stupid it was. They were going to send a bunch of troops there to Afghanistan to get blown up. And so, like, Abu Ghraib proved that, us good Christians are going to do horrible things when we're actually put on crusades. That no one's really watching over there, and telling us not to do these things. So what happened? Was it just that all these kids were evil and they only came out when they weren't punished for it? No. Abu Ghraib showed us that the Christians are scared to death from these radicals because they talk to them, they interrogate them and they say, why do you believe all this stuff about Allah? And they say, not only do we believe it, but we have the real history and the real language, and we are coming, we have the numbers and the population and the territory, and there's nothing you can do about it. We're going to have Israel soon. So they really did believe in that stuff enough to scare the neocons into, trying to contain them, but then CIA and so forth would push us further into war, exactly furthering their goals. Afghanistan can be compared to Syria. We invaded both, and Trump pulled us out of Syria. We didn't even hear about it. It didn't even make the news. But we all heard about the Afghanistan withdrawal because the Biden administration purposely botched it. Now, that's really intelligence, right? The remnants of the CIA, whatever they're called today. But let me get back to the war within, the enemy within. We saw these books coming out in the 80s and 90s and Heart of Darkness and all this. The enemy was within. We all started saying that because we saw the CIA fund the Ayatollah with taxpayer money to cause world war. And there's no way to stop that. Can't get rid of the CIA. And you can't defund them. So what did they do to the CIA? What did these neocons do? This is why, and this is the first podcast where I've ever mentioned my new theory that 9/11 may have been staged by good actors.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back. But just a quick reminder, if you'd like to rock some gear for one of your favorite podcasts, creatures, or topics, hop on over to the Open Minds Media Store on Etsy and Printify for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly. The most recent design available is the SQUATCH Country Fear and Loathing parody design, with Sasquatch as Hunter S. Thompson and Mothman as Dr. Gonzo, with artwork by Chris Holm of the Conspire Theory podcast. Welcome back to the show. Now let's dive right in.
Until now, I've always believed that they would be bad actors, people interested in more war and conflict, control. I mean, look at these metal detectors all over the place, Who benefits from that? Obviously, nobody took responsibility for 9/11. Not even bin Laden. He denied it himself. And a lot of people blamed the military, Loose Change documentary, the first one that I saw, blamed the military for it, staging it. Some people blame the Jews. I know the South Park had an episode like that, where they're actually saying that, but in a jokey way. BB, right after 9/11, said, this is good for Israel. Probably shouldn't have said that, but he meant it. He really meant it. The idea was that this was the shock America needed to wake up to the slow reality of the Ayatollah holy war that was going to come.
And also trying to hide some movement of money in the process of it, because you dig into all the
absolutely.
Pentagon stuff, and it was $6.8 trillion or something like that. And they had everybody meet up in one room, and they were going to discuss the budget, and then all of a sudden everything got destroyed. So they're on top of what you're saying, like hiding their funding behind doing this stuff.
I know, and this is it's so risky, it's so fragile. It's like forced the alliance between the Jews and the Christians in America, because they were both in on this one. If anyone was to ever expose 9/11 in the last 24 years, I mean, I know so many of us have tried to, but we didn't have the facts. We didn't have the final conclusions. We disagree with each other even. And we even disagreed about whether or not there were planes. And the reality is more about the religious geopolitical conflict. It was about how the Jews and Christians were going to keep the focus on terrorism, because, and I've thought about this a lot, that's the only way out of this pickle. The only way out if you can convince the world that all of the things you're about to do, the Patriot Act, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan.
The fact that they hid that under the
Syria.
Patriot Act too is ridiculous. Like, they took away your freedoms and then called it the Patriot Act. Like,
I know. We all hate the Patriot Act, and we hate the Democrats and Republicans for coming together on it. But that wasn't just a Democrat-Republican thing. That was a Jew-Christian thing. We all know that now. Again, more evidence came out recently, like when the Biden administration tried to halt weapons to Israel earlier this year. He got majorly railroaded on his attempts, and all this massive Jew support came out of our Congress, like we're used to. We've seen this plenty in the 90s. It used to be extremely pro-Jew country, and for the most part, it really still is. But we sort of weren't sure there for a while because of the propaganda, first BBC, then NPR, then TV shows, and the stuff coming out of Israel was not helping with Adam Sandler, shooting up the Arabs and his, what was that movie? The Zohar?
you don't mess with the Zohan.
Zohan.
One of those classics that didn't age very well.
Didn't age very well, right?
Still hilarious though.
Right. That guy wasn't being delicate. He was accidentally making racial attacks on Muslims and maybe on Jews too. But the point is that that's what we all do. My parents, I've been hearing them talk about this my whole life. And I've gone on the opposite side of this from them for a long time. I probably will always be on the Palestinian side because after all, they really were innocent in all of this European scheming that showed up. And it's not fair that a bunch of radicals showed up in their midst and now they're all being punished for it. So that's just the facts. But the bottom line is that the Judeo-Christians were willing to do all of these things to save America and Israel, which they both felt were threatened. And what kind of things? Well, 9/11, right? So moving all that money, stealing all that wealth, locking us down, mostly stalling up our economy and causing all this massive inflation and poverty and, you name it, disease and all this kind of stuff, was part of the plan. Part of a plan not only for the bad guys who always plan to do these resets with us, but also the good guys who had no choice but to pull the credit out of our country, all the wealth, all of the power, and put us through this ridiculous lockdown and what's the word? Dysphoria, I would say. Because after all, and I remember my martial arts instructor, bunch named Elliot from Phoenix, saying this once. America doesn't know that we're at war right now. We're at war in the 2000s and 2010s. And we've never stopped being at war. It's just that we happen to disagree with the wars. But that's the reason that we're all experiencing all this, suspension of our lives. We can't just get on with our lives and have opportunities and say what we want and find success. Everything is locked down because there was because this counter plan essentially had to go down and defeat the plan utterly. And both sides kicked the can down the road over and over. This stuff should have happened back in 2006 under Bush, but Bush was weakened by by Democrats, mostly in America, by anti-war protesters, to the point that in 2006, his plans for containing the Libyan area were hijacked by the CIA and taken over by the likes of Hillary Clinton, who said such things as, "We came, we saw, he died," referring to Gaddafi, who suffered a horrible death, just so that that country could be destroyed and filled with radicals. And now we have open-air slave markets of black people in Africa, just like old times. It's really tragic. And I would say that's an example of the neocons losing control of their agenda here, trying to contain radical Islam. The CIA is just going to take it and run with it. They're going to come up with all kinds of clever things, even defeat it. So back to the CIA. The crux of my whole argument was the big issue with 9/11 wasn't that 2 buildings were destroyed, or even that 3,000 plus people were killed, or even that a lot of money was stolen. If you really look at 9/11 as potentially staged by people who are trying to save Americans, then there's a couple of things we can rule out. First of all, nobody died. Nobody was in the building. I've always felt that, but now I finally feel like I know why. I had a friend when I went on Ulpan to Israel on a youth trip. I had a friend who was there who said she was in the building. and she was escorted out of the building as it was burning. She went out the building, ran down the street, and then the building came down. Both 9/11 buildings were on fire for a long, weird, awkward period of time. Awkward because nobody can understand why. There was this slow burning and then suddenly fast demolition. But the slow burning was to make sure everyone could evacuate. And they had to have people in the building for the event to be involved with people. But a lot of people speculate that since at the event that the buildings were empty. One of the reasons why they came down so fast. That the buildings came up in the first place to stage this whole event. The World Trade Centers, I mean, there's no need for these buildings to be built, but they were built for this event. And they started telling us about this event in the 80s. Who are they? The neocons. The intel group, not CIA, the other side. Their enemies, right here on our land, were trying to tell us about the plan. They said in so many movies, predictive programming, Simpsons.
I was just about to bring up all the Simpsons stuff because there's like hundreds of different things where it's like 2 ones and then a plane, or like Twin Towers and then a plane, and it's like it was all way before any of this.
But they got their best writers on that stuff too. Like, bathroom, other tower. He's like, oh crap. It's funny, right? They wouldn't have gotten the best writers to write predictive programming if those writers weren't on board with it in some degree. I know this because we receive a lot of predictive programming heavy-handed sometimes from these hugely funded movies where nobody seems to want to be involved, and the jokes are terrible or the plot's terrible. That happens all the time. So we know when it's the bad actors pushing propaganda on us because we hate the taste of it. But when it's really tasty and subtle, like, wow, we didn't think of that at all kind of thing, really got us on that one, that's when I have to imagine those were the good actors trying to tell us all the time. Best example, not best, but one of my favorite, Back to the Future. We saw Libyan terrorists, no one knew anything about terrorists at the time, but that was a major plot point. And then the second movie we saw, like on this video in the restaurant, Ayatollah-looking guy with flames behind him, trying to make the case that he's evil, And in the same movie, predictive programming of the Twin Towers falling in the scene where they're all in the parents' house in the future, and the Marty's wife in the future pulls up the blinds. But right before she does that, there's a picture of the two towers projected from a projector. Many analysts have said that is predictive programming of the two towers collapsing, that it's uncanny, and it's and the possibility of a coincidence is ruled out here. So they were telling us this because they didn't want us to worry when it finally happens. They didn't want us to panic because panic would fall into the hands of their enemies, the CIA. So what am I building to? I'm getting to this big point here. 9/11, if it wasn't about the two buildings falling down, it wasn't about anyone dying, what was it about? It was about Building 7, right? The building that nobody knows why it came down, because it wasn't hit by planes, and all it had was structural fires from random debris, which, everyone on the street knows cannot bring a building down. So Building 7, the most mysterious part of all of 9/11, that was the CIA headquarters. And I have since heard from CIA officials that, boy, were they taken out on 9/11. The CIA headquarters was completely destroyed, along with all of their classified documents, which they really don't store anywhere else in this country. Not all of them. And for all the other places that they do store them, that's illegal. Not supposed to be doing that. So the CIA was undone, humiliated, destroyed, and neutralized on that day. All their plans that they set in motion would continue to play out, on their own, but they would not be protected anymore by the CIA. And at the same time, in 2001, we saw new agencies come out, the NSA, which appeared to have the exact same purpose, protecting us with intelligence, surveying the enemy in foreign countries. They set up all those metal detectors. And like I said earlier, I've always been pissed off at the metal detectors. I thought they've been exaggerations. We don't need them. They're there to make us feel afraid. But what was really happening this whole time was that the Ayatollah dirty bomb plan was fresh and ready to go. And the makings of it were exposing themselves again and again. One of the biggest ones was Al Gore. This guy, he should have been a celebrity, not a politician, came out of nowhere and told the world that he needs to save it from global warming. And suddenly this narrative was so devastatingly effective that he almost won the presidential campaign in 2000. And there was a big fight at court in Florida to over the vote. Essentially, many people, Democrats especially, said that Bush had stolen that election. I don't really think that that's not not within the realm of plausibility. I think he did steal that election. I think that was one of the examples of the neocons freaking out and saying, this Al Gore guy is going to ensure, he's going to protect this Muslim dirty bomb Iran proxy plan. They're going to make sure it happens in the next 4 years. If we don't steal this election, if we don't put those detectors up, if we don't put Americans back into a state of war all within 2001, right after Bush gets elected, then they will never have an opportunity to ever counter the plan again, since the enemy is so far within now that they could probably win a presidential election. And then they did, right? Bush was weakened. 2006, he basically started disappearing, and from public, he didn't really he couldn't control the wars anymore. Everything was a mess, and it was ripe for this new narrative, hope and change from Obama and Hillary. Hillary was part of that mess. She had just caused a huge screw up in Libya, and yet she won as VP, right? So, or no, she wasn't VP. She was Biden was, but she was the primary contender, actually. So she almost won the presidency. So she was being rewarded by the Democrats for being such a crazy neocon, causing destruction and mayhem across the planet. They obviously weren't aware of what she was. They weren't aware of Al Gore. They weren't aware of Obama. That's what the neocons were afraid of. So the neocons eventually had the thing happen to them, Obama. And under Obama, guess what happened? He did an Iran deal to protect the Iran plan, the CIA plan, to make sure that it happens, to make sure that there's protection from our end, that the Iranians can do everything they need to do to finish those bombs. And then, but we're going to exchange the fuel at that point. And they agreed to that. Then at some point in the future, it's predicted that the Iranians will break the deal. The Israelis have been saying so since the 90s, that the Iranians will simply break the deal at that point, and then they'll proliferate a bomb somehow to their proxies. In fact, if a bomb got to a proxy and blew up, the Iranians would be blamed. And they would probably say, oh, we had nothing to do with that, and it wouldn't matter. So everyone got to this logical point in the plot arc, realized the exact same thing, that Obama, the administration, was an attempt to basically cause this to all happen again. Now the can has been kicked down 10 years down the road into the Obama administration. All these wars happen. He bombs Yemen with crazy artillery just to radicalize Yemen, just so that Yemen could play a role in the future conflict over Gaza, which they did. After the October 7th thing played out, Yemen Houthis shot intercontinental missiles, not the Russian ballistic kind, but shorter range, very scary, advanced, probably left over from USSR, but maybe built by Iran. They got all kinds of stuff now, and they were able to hit Israel with those missiles. So the only reason that Obama bombed Yemen was to create radicals in Yemen that could be controlled in that moment. They knew that the radicals would join the Muslims in their what's the word? Solidarity. So that's how easy it is to get the Muslims onto the Holy War. And we saw how the Christians could get on there. And then as far as the Jews, from my time in Israel and my perspective, I believe that Jews do not want war. They are very peaceful people, and yet can be just as easily radicalized into crazy violence. It's the same. So that's what scared the neocons. This plan was almost foolproof. There was no way of stopping it. You couldn't send soldiers over to contain radical insurgencies that we have been supporting. That we've already know that how that ends with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and all the people who we've supported. I even like those guys. I think that they ended up being heroes for their country. But the point is that you can never control of insurgency once it reaches a certain point. So everyone knew this back in the 79 Ayatollah Revolution, that they freaked out. They set up their plans in motion, and then they all shut up. And then we're all born into it, and nobody wants to talk about it. And nobody wanted to talk about 9/11. That was one of the weirdest things in my life. Even my grandmother, when I visited her one time, she said the exact same thing. I can't believe that nobody has talked about 9/11. Even when it happened, they all sort of just agreed with what the TV said and then never ever want to talk about it again. So I don't believe that such a thing can happen just because one side wins. And I finally concluded that it's because both sides were at war with this whole thing. 9/11 was a blow to the other side, clandestine operation against clandestine agencies. And they couldn't tell us about it because they had to get all the way to this point. What's this point? I'm going to finish with this. The October 7th thing last year was the obvious trigger for the obvious radical Muslim holy war plan that the CIA and MI6 had set up so long ago. They knew that all it would take someday is for the Muslims to strike some kind of big blow on Israel, who's been winning every war that they had. 48, 67, 73. The Israelis always won. So someday, if they get hit by a dirty bomb or something just devastating like that, then they will overreact. And everyone knows it, just like we saw on October 7th. So knowing this, did they have a plan to trigger October 7th? Well, let's look closely at it. The Israeli army stood down. Of course, they always stand down, right, during these events. And there was an investigation into the security officers after the event was over as to who gave certain orders to stand down, who leaked certain information to allow the enemy to know, all kinds of stuff. So yes, there is actually evidence behind that the Israeli army had a hand in October 7th. That parts of their army cannot be stopped from standing down at the wrong moments. Armies are kind of blind and stupid a lot of times when it comes to their leadership. It's so easy to take over the generals and just cause general blindness throughout the army. We've seen that in the last 20 years of American army. And in Israel, they could do the exact same thing without the soldiers themselves being aware that that's what's really happening. There's a certain element within Israel, the intelligence element, who I believe has never been religious, doesn't believe in God. They came from Poland. These are people like Bibi Netanyahu and his daddy. They are major Zionists. But being a Zionist doesn't mean that you're necessarily a monotheist. A Zionist just believes in Israel, just believes in the land and the sovereignty. That's it. Just like we Americans believe in our sovereignty, even though we took it from the Native Americans, we still believe in it though. So that's my point here: is that these the innermost secular, not secular, the innermost intelligence network of Israel has always been aware of their own internal danger of radicalization. They can be radicalized just like everyone else, and they may have, I'm saying may have, I don't know, gone along with staging this October 7th to get the exact outcome that they wanted. And maybe they've left behind a lot of evidence of this too. The so-called Greater Israel Project, a declassified CIA document. I'm assuming CIA, I don't know, 2000s, could have been NSA or anyone else. And it leaked, definitely leaked. We saw it. We're not supposed to be seeing all these things, by the way. In WikiLeaks, that should have never happened. So somebody within our intel agencies has been leaking all this stuff, like Gaddafi. All those cables were leaked for the first time. That's what got him in trouble. We were able to ruin him reputation-wise with all of his players, local players, and even Americans, and then took him out. So yeah, I believe the CIA was, for 100 years, for Hoover, 50 years the CIA kept secrets. And then after 9/11, CIA started leaking secrets everywhere to cause damage. That's basically what they become. And the
also muddy the waters up a bit too, because I'm sure they throw out a bunch of conspiracies that are complete bullshit, but they're just trying to mucky up the water.
I think they're behind Loose Change documentary. That was really early for us to hear that 9/11 might have been an inside job. Whoa, Americans didn't talk like that back in 2006.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. But before we get into this break, if you might be interested in joining a growing community of like-minded individuals, then pop on over to the Open Minds Media Telegram, a place to discuss high strangeness, conspiracies, and anything else on your mind. Bizarre and open-minded individuals always welcome. Link to join available down in the show description. And we are back, so let's get back to it.
So when I saw that documentary, I was surprised that they actually went with a conclusion. And we believe that 9/11 was staged by the U.S. military, and we think that was a missile hit the Pentagon. It's like, what? You don't know what a missile looks like. It could have been a plane. It could have been anything. It could have been a planted bomb.
CIA propaganda. It was the military, not us.
Right. It's just, I mean, no, you don't know what a missile crashing into a building looks like. It's impossible. You have to be forensic analysis. And even then, the footage we got was inconclusive. So for some reason, somebody in loose change insisted that we want to blame the U.S. military for 9/11. Hell, I don't even think they're wrong. I think the military did stand down, that they were part of it. But they don't want to admit to it. They don't want to say, oh, yeah, we did part of 9/11 there. And guess we should take down the metal detectors and leave all of our foreign bases, right? Not going to happen. So the point was loose change was trying to break the whole 9/11 conspiracy early in there, tell us all about it, and blame the government for it. Very anarchy, very, what Antifa, the kind of people they do sponsor in the end. And, they overthrow people with radicalism. They're not, the CIA does not prop up neocons and strongmen across the country. They try to take them down. Like Turkey, like Erdogan in Turkey, they tried to do a coup on him only in 2000, I don't know, 15, I don't know how many years it's been now. That failed. And the Turkey people, they saw it and they stopped it right in place. And if they had gotten that coup, then they probably would have been able to bring a much larger force, actual ISIS militants, into Israel region for the October 7th thing. Instead, the October 7th thing was actually kind of light. There weren't actually that many militants. They attacked areas that were totally unguarded.
A music festival being one of them.
Festival that just happened to be on the border and containing the children of many officials in the government and even celebrities and stuff. I mean, this wasn't just some festival. It was the festival to be at. They made sure of that. And there's a lot of people who disappeared and then, captured, kidnapped, went into Gaza that the government never cared to try to find them again. Even the protesters on the streets for the last year have been screaming that you guys aren't trying very hard to find my relatives. We don't even know if these protesters were real. And as far as the some of the hostages, some of them were found, in Gaza. They were captured and rescued, and they looked just fine to me. So I do believe there's a lot of hokiness going around the October thing, but I do believe that they needed it to happen. And the objective here was for the neocons, if we can focus all of this on terrorism, then we can prevent the Holy War at the most subtle level, at the core of its nature. The Holy War will never happen because the leadership caste is constantly reminding everyone that, no, it's not about the Muslims. You don't have to use that word and you don't have to attack them in that way. Just focus on the terrorists. And when Israel bombs places like Syria, they say the same thing. We're trying to prevent these radicals from getting these weapons in this depot in Syria. And actually, we're okay with those radicals over there. So let me get into the Syrian thing a little bit. Nobody expected that the Assad regime would fall within one day. They expected that the Syrian army would stay and fight. But they melted away like we haven't seen since, a while. Since, I don't know, the Nazis fell or something. They really just melted away and disappeared. And Assad left the country immediately. He went to Russia, of all places, and he's now in asylum. So a little bit of history here. 1973, the Yom Kippur War of Israel. It wasn't just Syrians deciding to attack Israel. It was Assad's father. I forget the first name of either of them. A guy named Assad who staged a coup in Syria in 1973, or two, I think. Immediately after the coup, seizing control of that whole country, he rallies up the army and attacks Israel. So that wasn't just Muslims. It wasn't just about taking back the Holy Land. That was literally a terrorist who had taken over his country with terrorism. Assad was a radical. And he's not so different from Hitler. Hitler, Mussolini, those guys staged a great deal of terrorism and intimidation tactics in their homeland before finally forcing power. Took a lot. They had to steal elections and stuff too. So when Assad's son came into power, I don't remember what year this was, early 2000s again, they had to lower the age requirement from 40 to 34 to get him in there. And he took over power directly from his father and continued the rule, which lasted apparently some 45 or 53 years, according to locals. And when he left, you see people in the streets cheering, toppling the towers, just like in the USSR. toppling statues of Assad and his father. And the rebels are like, they look like rebels. They're radical a little bit. They're shooting guns in the air like idiots. And yet the people aren't afraid. They're not going into their houses in fear of these rebels showing up. And big clue, you got Western journalists everywhere. In the presidential palace, where the leader of the Free Syrian Rebel Army, who is totally Western bats, and we've said so many times that we back them, he was giving a big speech. He was surrounded by reporters from all over the planet. These guys did not look the least bit afraid for their own safety. So these aren't just your average Muslim radicals. These are Western-backed. They're moderates. They've been called moderate for a lot of years. You know, you and I and the rest of us never believe this crap when CNN tells us that. Like, oh yeah, sure, sponsoring moderates for whatever. It's all a big mess. But no, this is something else. There was actually a strain of moderate Islam and Judaism that emerged from all this, where the certain Muslims, not a lot of them, but mostly the rich ones who want to do business, accepted since the 70s, especially since the Ayatollah revolution, especially, that there's a huge problem in Islam and that they don't want to have anything to do with it. So if the Jews are going to make a plan to contain radical Islam, they want to be part of it. They want to be, even if it's going to be subordinate Islam, even if they have to say things like Jerusalem is the holy land, ancient land of the Jews, and it belongs to them, which so many people in that region have done. Under Trump's Abraham Accords, you have Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and a few others, all full of Muslims who are willing to accept the state of Israel for the first time in history. And the players in that region were literally at war with the radicals of the same region, rebels versus rebels. And so we saw in Syria, in the early parts of the war, America's army coming in, backing the wrong rebels, trying to overthrow Assad. But lately, that was ISIS, right? We sponsored ISIS, and they almost took that whole region. They destroyed ancient artifacts in Palmyra. I think that's the name of that town, that city. That's a big giveaway. A Muslim radical army destroying ancient Muslim artifacts is a big giveaway that these guys are foreign sponsored. And so the Free Syrian Army, well, they're also US backed, but by the neocons. And there is this big separation between the ones that the CIA sponsored and the ones that came later. So what we're seeing in Syria is just really telling. It really revealed so much that there was a plan to stop the radicals with moderates, that we found Muslims who are willing to go along with Israel as a sovereign country forever. And we just need a trigger, a sort of way to take it out, to move Assad out, to move, to finally isolate Iran so they have no more proxies, and to destroy Hezbollah. I've always been fans of Hezbollah, but let's face it, they've been infiltrated with the exact same radicalism that ISIS had. They were willing to say things like the destruction of Israel, and that's their giveaway. They can never be moderate as long as they talk that way. So that's that. The Israelis won. They used their trigger to create their regional incursions. They use their proxies, their moderate rebels, to attack in the areas that are well outside their reach, and they did it all in the name of fighting terrorism. And so did the rebels. That speech in the palace in Aleppo, when I was watching it on Al Jazeera yesterday, I heard the rebel Syrian leaders say, "We were only trying to get rid of Assad. We're not after anyone. We're not after his minority Muslim sect that supports him. The rich people live in Syria. We're not going to go and pillage them now. We're not going to throw them in jail either. In fact, we want everyone to get along." That's what he said. I love that. I mean, that's a rebel leader saying that. You know, that place is in good hands. And then on the Israel side, a speech from Bibi. He said, "We accomplished all our goals. We're looking real good right now. We want to cooperate with anyone that wants to cooperate with us. All Muslims, Jews, and Christians, and everyone in the world can come and live here in peace." He said that just 2 days ago. And we're only going to attack terrorists. So we're at the very end now. That is the the counter plan this whole time. to wipe out the Iranian threat without attacking Iran, without causing hundreds of thousands of deaths in a holy war, without getting Muslims and Christians and Jews actually at each other's throats, which is so easy to do, and getting everyone into a unified vision of security above all. You get to live in peace, and you have to worry about someone coming into your town, changing the regime, and just effing things up again. So I think I've rambled long enough. Any questions about the neocon strategy theory?
Stay tuned, guys. This is our last break. But if you guys enjoyed the show and think I deserve it, please leave a review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify. Your continued support is what makes this show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help the show grow and improve. So thank you. Now back with that deep conversation you crave. Well, man, honestly, every single time you come on, you got so much information that you just like information dump, and you got to like sit and process it, man. But you give people so much to think about because, like I said, man, your research is so in depth, and you get every single intricate detail to it. And this is again why I love having you on the show, man. Like nobody covers stuff like you do, man. And honestly, like ending at the end too, man. There's not too many questions because you cover stuff so well that it's like as you're going through, you end up explaining any questions I may have had. So it's like, as the podcast host, man, you make my job easy because of the way you do your research.
Excellent. That's good to hear. I always feel like I'm missing out something, but I think I covered it all. That's the theory. 9/11 was staged by good actors. It ruined all of our lives, but they're trying to save us. And we wanted to believe that there wasn't a threat, that religion was a thing of the past. We're also sick of it, churches, synagogues, and mosques, and we thought it was fading away. But turns out there was this whole looming World War III reset plan that was always there. Why? Because the deep state, as I call them, did not get what they wanted in the last reset, World War II. They put everything into destroying Russia and creating a new fascist centralized ideology where the Nazis would rule the world. And when that failed, they simply set up for a brand new, exactly the same strategy playbook with Zelensky in Ukraine. And I didn't want to get into Ukraine's sad history. I think I covered that a little bit last time, but boy, does this all really trace back to Ukraine. Almost all of the major events of the 20th century, the Holodomor and the major genocide that occurred in Russia, the thing that was a precursor to World War II with the Jews, the thing that actually drove them into Europe in the first place, that was all Ukraine. That was the genocide of Ukraine, those Nazis who were trying to create a new, they're trying to use this power that I've been talking about, this Abrahamic, just untapped holy war power, and just transfer it into an actual army and then attack somebody with it, So I think we only because we were smart enough in the future, we've seen history repeat so much that the neocons ended up coming up with a counter plan that actually worked. And I'll have to give them credit. They weren't as stupid as they looked. People like George Bush and his daddy really looked like idiots, but only because we didn't believe them.
I mean, that might be purposeful too. I mean, in all fairness though, because the average person, they look at them like they're dumb, so they're not going to listen to them anyways. I mean, propaganda, at its finest, because every single newscast when Bush was around, all that stuff, they made him into a meme before memes were a thing.
Yep. Yeah, let me give you a little it's just something I thought of here with Bush. Remember that time when he got in the aircraft carrier and said mission accomplished?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the bizarrest thing? Like, that was in the early middle of the war, right? We weren't even close to finished. That, I remember, nobody understood that, but now I get it. This was a fight between the neocons and the CIA had pushed us into Afghanistan, and we didn't want to go there anymore. So, and they pushed us into Iraq too, like more than we should have, and they caused the Abu Ghraib stuff. And Bush was trying to put a lid on it. He wanted us to contain Russia. They wanted us to, okay, we're done. Let's stop. No more. We don't have to do anything else. That was the message they were sending to his own army in that speech, and it failed because we know that later on we stayed in Afghanistan and it got worse. So you can see how those moments are so encrypted. We don't understand them, and the media doesn't tell us, give us any clues. They want us to be dumb if they can help it, and they made Bush look dumb too. But there's a lot of things that we can now, I think that the dust has settled, finally put together and say, oh, that's what that was, And this will be really key, because if this world's going to heal from the chaos it's in right now, we're going to have to come together on something. And I think it's great that there was sort of a way out of the religious schism, a way to say, we're all going to come together to fight the terrorists, if that's what it took. I don't care what it takes. I wish it was more like Independence Day when the aliens showed up, and we all got together finally for the first time to fight them. And you got the Arabs and the Jews and their airplanes, F-15s and stuff. That was such a righteous moment, that movie,
That's Plan B, Project Bluebeam.
I know. That's exactly why the aliens don't show up. They know exactly that we would be unified against them like that. We'd forget our religious tensions. Whew, I think I've rambled long enough.
Well, I guess this is a good spot to do some words of wisdom, even though you've kind of been spitting a little bit here at the end. But if there's any words of wisdom you could bestow on the listeners today, what might it be, man?
I'll say the same thing I said last time. It's very important to try to make up with people. I've been seeing fights my whole life, bad blood, some things that never get resolved. And all I got to say is try to concentrate on the fact, and this is a fact, that we were all set against each other with all this propaganda and this chaos and these wars. It's not our fight, and we actually shouldn't be fighting each other about anything. So, knowing that, try to be forgiving. Just try to forgive people that you have disputes with, because this is a good time to do that.
I mean, that's universal regardless. Forgiveness is key, man.
I agree.
And
never a bad time.
If anybody wanted to dig into some of this stuff on their own, on your website, see all the details and all the connections themselves, why don't you let everybody know again where they can come and find you on the internet and where they can come and find your website?
Yeah. Feel free to check out paradigmthreat.net. That's my website. All my articles are on there, images, videos. And I did build a little chat feature recently I'm trying to get people to use. So feel free to send me a little chat as well.
Well, that's awesome, man. I appreciate you making the time to come on again today, man, to keep sharing your information. And you're always welcome on the show. I'm sure that we'll probably end up talking. You'll have something else you have to dive into. And then we'll end up doing a part 5 on this one too, man.
You bet.
If any of you guys out there want to get a hold of me for any reason whatsoever, possibly being a guest on the show, possibly even sharing an experience or an encounter, or even just simply having a conversation with me, you guys can get a hold of me through email, which is increaseourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys get a hold of me through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones I'm the most active on, or you guys can contact me through the submission form, which is available on the link tree, and that one will go directly to my email, or you guys can also call in or text the hotline, and that number is 313-364-1551. And if you guys have some free time, don't forget to go and check out the awesome friends of the show, I Know Squatch, Snarly Owl Natural Products, Crypto Theology, and Big Ape Threads, and our friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available. More information on those are available, of course, down in the show description. And every single thing that I mentioned throughout the show is all available on the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality, and I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions.